The snow had begun to fall again, light at first, then heavier, the kind that silenced the world and made even a busy place feel abandoned, and Eleanor Whitmore felt it crunch beneath her boots as she stepped down from the train with nothing but a worn leather bag and a folded letter that had already changed her life. The letter that named her a mail-order bride to a man she had never met, a man who owned land somewhere beyond this lonely station, a man she hoped was kind, because hope was all she had left after burying her parents and selling the last of her belongings to buy this one-way ticket west. And as the steam hissed and the train cars groaned like tired beasts, she hugged her coat tighter and scanned the platform for a face that might be hers to recognize. But there was no welcoming smile, no bouquet, no sign of life, except the echo of her own breath and the distant caw of a crow perched on a telegraph pole. And that was when she saw him, not standing as she expected, but slumped against a wooden post near the far end of the platform, his hat tilted low, his body unnaturally still, and at first she thought he was simply resting. Another traveler worn down by the cold. But then she noticed the dark stains on the snow near his boots, the way one hand trembled faintly as it pressed against his side, and something inside her tightened with a fear she could not ignore. So she walked toward him slowly, every step heavy with uncertainty, and as she drew closer she saw the blood, fresh and dark against his shirt and fingers, his face pale beneath the dust and stubble, eyes half-lidded as if he were fighting sleep, the dangerous kind that never lets you wake again. And when he finally looked up at her, his gaze sharpened just enough to show surprise, then pain, and then resignation, the look of a man who had already decided this was where his story ended. And he tried to speak, but only a breath escaped him, rough and broken, and Eleanor knelt without thinking, her knees hitting the frozen wood as if the cold meant nothing, her hands already moving, lifting his wrist, feeling the weak but stubborn pulse still beating beneath her fingers. And she realized in that instant that she had crossed half a country chasing a future she didn't understand, only to find herself face to face with a man who might not live to see another sunrise. And she could have screamed for help, could have run back to the train, could have told herself it was not her responsibility, but something in his eyes stopped her, something proud and lonely and familiar, the same look her father had worn in his final days, refusing to admit how much he hurt. And her voice came out stronger than she felt as she said his name, the name from the letter, testing it against the wind, and his brow furrowed faintly as if it surprised him that someone knew it. And he whispered that she should go, that there was nothing left for him, that the land he owned was worthless now, that he had enemies and wounds and debts that followed him like shadows. But Eleanor shook her head, tears freezing at the corners of her eyes as she pressed her scarf against his bleeding side, and she told him that she did not cross the world to watch a man die alone in the snow, that she had already buried too many people she loved. And then, gripping his hand with a firmness that startled them both, she said the words that would change both their lives. "You're coming with me." And for the first time, real fear crossed his face. Not fear of death, but fear of hope, because hope hurt worse than any bullet when it failed. And yet when she tried to lift him and he nearly collapsed, he clenched his jaw and pushed himself up with what little strength he had left, driven not by survival alone, but by the strange determination in her eyes. And together they moved inch by inch off the platform, her shoulder under his arm, his weight heavy and unyielding, every step leaving a darker trail in the snow. And as they reached the waiting wagon she had hired with her last coins, the sky dimmed and the storm thickened, and Eleanor did not know then that this man had been shot defending land others wanted, that men were already searching for him, that bringing him home would drag danger to her doorstep. She only knew that if she let go now, she would lose something she had not yet named. And as the wagon creaked forward into the wide unknown, she whispered a silent promise to herself and to him, that whatever waited at the end of this road, she would face it, because sometimes destiny does not arrive with flowers and certainty. Sometimes it bleeds, sometimes it begs, and sometimes it waits for a stranger brave enough to say no to death. And if this story has already pulled you into its world, if you want to know whether the dying cowboy survives and whether the mail-order bride finds the love she never expected, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the journey has only just begun, and the next chapter will take us deeper into danger, healing, and a bond neither of them saw coming. The wagon wheels groaned beneath the weight of him as Eleanor urged the old horse forward, the animal snorting clouds of steam, into the freezing air while the storm swallowed the station behind them, and with every jolt the man beside her hissed softly through clenched teeth, blood soaking deeper into the cloth she had pressed against his side. Yet he never cried out, never begged, and that silence told her more about him than words ever could, because only a man who had learned to endure alone carried pain like that. And as the road narrowed into a ribbon of white between dark trees, Eleanor spoke to him, not knowing if he could hear, telling him her name, telling him about the letter, about the promise of a home she had followed west like a fool chasing smoke. And when he finally murmured that she should turn back, that men would come looking for him, she answered without hesitation that they would have to come through her first, surprising herself with the truth of it, because fear had followed her all her life, and she was tired of letting it decide who lived and who died. And when the wagon lurched over a frozen rut and his head fell against her shoulder, she felt the weight of responsibility settle into her bones, heavy and irreversible, and she knew then that this journey was no longer about a marriage arrangement, or land or survival. It was about a choice she had made on that platform, a choice that bound their fates together whether either of them wanted it or not. And when they finally reached the small cabin hidden among the pines, its windows dark and its door half buried in snow, Eleanor jumped down and fought the latch with numb fingers until it gave way, dragging him inside inch by inch, leaving a trail across the floor that made her throat tighten. And she laid him near the hearth, built a fire with shaking hands, and cleaned his wounds as best she could, cutting away fabric, washing blood with melted snow, whispering encouragement even as he drifted in and out of consciousness. And at one point his eyes opened and fixed on her with startling clarity, and he asked her why she stayed, why she did not save herself the trouble. And Eleanor swallowed hard and answered that sometimes the world did not give you what you asked for. It gave you what you needed. And he closed his eyes again, the tension easing from his brow as if those words had carried him somewhere safer. And as the night deepened and the storm raged outside, Eleanor sat beside him holding his hand, listening to his breathing, counting every rise and fall as if it were a prayer, unaware that far beyond the trees, riders had already found the blood-stained platform and were following the trail she had tried to erase, unaware that by morning, her quiet act of mercy would ignite a storm far greater than the one beating against the cabin walls. And if you're feeling the tension build, if you want to see whether this wounded cowboy lives through the night, and what dangers are riding toward them through the snow, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the story is only growing deeper, darker, and more powerful from here. Morning came slowly, not with warmth or light, but with the ache of exhaustion settling deep into Eleanor's bones as she lifted her head from the edge of the hearth where she had slept sitting upright, afraid that if she closed her eyes too fully, she might miss the moment when his breathing changed, and for a terrifying heartbeat she thought the cabin had gone too quiet. But then she heard it, faint yet steady, the sound of life refusing to give up, and relief washed over her so strongly she had to press her hand to her mouth to keep from sobbing, because the man she had dragged from the snow was still here, still fighting. And when she leaned closer, she saw that the color had returned slightly to his face, that the bleeding had slowed, and that his chest rose with more strength than it had the night before. And though she did not yet know his full story, she knew she had won the first battle against death. But victory came with consequences, and those consequences announced themselves before the sun fully crested the trees, with the distant sound of hooves, faint at first, then unmistakable, the rhythmic thunder of riders moving with purpose. And Eleanor's heart began to race as she froze, listening, counting, praying she was wrong. But the sound only grew clearer, closer, until she knew with terrible certainty that they were coming for him. And when he stirred and opened his eyes, sharper now, more aware, she did not lie to him. She told him plainly that someone was on the road, that she did not know who, but she knew they were dangerous. And he pushed himself up with a grunt of pain, his jaw hardening as he reached for the rifle resting near the wall, his voice rough as he told her that this was his doing, that the men who shot him wanted his land, his cattle and his silence, and that she should hide, should let him face what he had been running from. But Eleanor shook her head, her fear burning into something fiercer, something unbreakable, and she told him that she did not survive the loss of her family, the long journey west, and the terror of that station just to abandon him now. And when the riders finally burst into the clearing, their horses snorting and stamping, their shadows stretching across the snow like dark promises. Eleanor stood between the door and the man behind her hands shaking but her voice steady as she demanded to know what they wanted. And the men laughed at first, amused by the sight of a woman daring to block their way, but the laughter faded when they saw the rifle leveled from behind her shoulder, when they realized the dying cowboy had not died after all. And in that standoff, with breath held and fingers twitching near triggers, something changed, because for the first time in his life, he was not standing alone, and the knowledge of that settled into his spine like steel, giving him strength he did not know he had left. And when the leader finally spat into the snow and ordered his men back, promising they would return, Eleanor did not collapse as soon as they were gone. She only turned slowly and met his gaze, and in that silent exchange, something deeper than gratitude passed between them. Something like trust, like the beginning of a bond forged not by letters or arrangements, but by fire and fear and the choice to stay. Days passed after that, each one a careful balance between healing and vigilance. Eleanor tending his wounds, cooking what little food she had left, learning the rhythm of the land and the man she had come to save. And he told her pieces of his past in fragments, of a ranch inherited and nearly lost, of standing up to men who believed power meant taking what they wanted, of paying for that, defiance with blood. And Eleanor listened without judgment, sharing her own story in return of loneliness, of courage she had not known she possessed, of choosing him not because she was promised to him, but because something inside her recognized his fight. And as his strength returned, so did his smile, rare and quiet but real. And when he finally stood unaided in the doorway of the cabin, the winter sun lighting his face, Eleanor realized that the man she had pulled from the brink of death was no longer just someone she was saving. He was someone she was choosing. And when the danger came again, because it always does, they faced it together, not as strangers bound by a letter, but as partners bound by something far stronger. And when the last threat faded and peace settled over the land, Eleanor understood that her journey west had not been a gamble after all. It had been a calling, one that led her not just to a home, but to a love born in snow and survival, a love that neither of them would ever take for granted. And if this story moved you, if you felt every heartbeat, every choice, every moment of courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this remind us that sometimes love finds us when we are most broken, and the next story might just find you too.